I fainted at work. The doctors rang my son. He never came, and didn't even call back. Instead, his wife tagged me in a family photo, happy faces. Champagne captioned something smug about enjoying a perfect day without the drama queen. 3 days later, still in the hospital and weak, I scrolled through my phone to find 3 missed calls from Michael and a flood of frantic texts. "Mom, pick up. This is serious. Answer now." Lying in a hospital bed, staring at that screen, I couldn't believe the gall of my own family. It all began on a mundane Tuesday at Henderson Insurance, where I'd worked 12 years as a claims adjuster. Paperwork, bad coffee, nothing out of the ordinary until a sudden, crushing chest pain hit me, the kind you only read about in pamphlets. Janet, my coworker, rushed over as I clutched my desk. Someone called an ambulance. Everything went black. I woke up in Street Mary's cardiac unit with an IV in my arm and a solemn cardiologist telling me I'd had a mild heart attack. "We've contacted your emergency contact," Dr. Patterson said. "Your son Michael should be here soon." Those words echoed as I watched the door all day. Day 1, no Michael. Day 2, flowers and cards from neighbors and coworkers. Day 3, an Instagram tag showing Michael, Cheryl, and the twins at a fancy restaurant, all smiles. The caption rubbed salt in the wound. "Perfect day without the drama queen. Blessed drama queen. I'd been in the hospital for 3 days, and apparently that made me a joke." Then the phone buzzed. 3 missed calls and frantic messages demanding I answer. I nearly fell into my old habit, drop everything for my son, but that restaurant photo and Cheryl's smug expression kept replaying in my head. Instead of picking up, I called my lawyer. Sitting in attorney Richard Morrison's office a week after leaving the hospital, I felt steadier than I had in months. I'd come with a plan: revoke the financial power of attorney I'd granted Michael, rewrite my will, move retirement funds out of joint access, and formalize repayment for the loans I'd given him over the years. Richard skimmed the files I'd brought, the bank statements, check stubs, and grimaced at the total. $47,000 over 8 years. I wanted written repayment terms, market rate interest, everything on paper. He warned me this would cause family strife, but I'd finally realized I'd been confusing usefulness with being loved. That ended now. The next day we served Michael. In his immaculate living room, the one I'd helped fund with a $20,000 loan, he flipped through the documents, growing red with each page. Richard explained the conversion of previous gifts into formal loans, the repayment schedule, and the revocation of Michael's access. Cheryl came out of the kitchen, her makeup perfect, and her face draining pale when she saw the papers. "You can't be serious," she said. I asked what they'd done for me, and she waved around their house as if my being in my son's life were their charity. When Michael tried the old manipulation, think of the kids, I felt that familiar tug. 7-year-old Emma hugged my waist and begged about presents. My heart softened, but the memory of lying alone in that hospital bed steeled me. I kissed Emma, promised to visit soon, and told Michael plainly that the Bank of Dorothy was closed. As I left, Cheryl muttered that they'd warned me about assisted living last year. That message, combined with a mysterious text from a Sunset Manor representative asking if I was still interested, made something click. They'd been planning more than indifference, they'd been planning control. I forwarded that strange Sunset Manor message to Richard and told him this went deeper than a petty Instagram jab. He recommended a private investigator. Sandra Martinez arrived looking nothing like the cliché PI, former detective, sharp, kind eyes, and a no-nonsense attitude. We met in a quiet cafe so nobody from my family would bump into us. I handed over everything I'd collected. The brochure I'd found tucked in Michael's car, the Sunset Manor text, copies of my medical visit summaries, and a timeline of odd phone calls asking if I seemed confused. Sandra listened, then dropped a line that made my stomach flip. They'd been building a guardianship case. She explained how someone could quietly collect evidence of cognitive decline, a missed bill here, a forgotten name there, and present it as proof to a court. If successful, Michael could be my legal guardian, control my money, pick my home, and place me wherever he chose. The thought of someone I'd raised deciding where I lived made my hands go cold. Over the next 2 weeks, Sandra dug like a terrier. She found meetings with an elder law attorney and a financial planner, inquiries into quiet title procedures, and those 3 calls to my doctor from someone posing as a concerned family member. The doctor's notes said there was nothing wrong. She traced loan money and discovered how funds I'd thought were for emergencies were diverted. The roof repair money paid for a family vacation. A large medical withdrawal had funded cosmetic surgery. Each revelation felt like another betrayal. Sandra was blunt. Catching them before any court papers were filed made my options better, but elder financial abuse is maddeningly hard to prosecute. I handed her my loan records and Richard's new legal paperwork, the revocation, the loan contracts I just had drawn up, and asked, almost defiantly, what I should aim for. Repair? Justice? Protection? Sandra's advice was surgical. Protect your assets first, then collect and preserve evidence. That led to Catherine Wells at Premier Estate Planning. Catherine's office smelled of polished wood and competence. She built a strategy that felt like armor. A revocable trust for my house, accounts moved so Michael couldn't reach them, and legal structures designed to make any guardianship attempt costly and slow. The most satisfying move, at least to my sense of poetic justice, was founding a charity. The Dorothy Hartwell Foundation for Senior Financial Protection became a registered 501(c)(3), funded largely with money I redirected to keep it forever out of reach of predatory family members. I kept enough to live on comfortably, but most of my liquid assets, nearly $200,000, were now earmarked to help others avoid my near miss. Catherine also helped me plan the public part of my recovery. Speaking engagements, media outreach, the works. Sandra had delivered a packet of evidence to my house that morning. I knew Michael and Cheryl would find their copies. I wasn't sure if I wanted anger or relief when the first conciliatory text arrived. Maybe we overreacted. Can we start fresh? My answer, firm but not cruel, was no, not yet. When Michael and Cheryl did show up on my porch that evening, their desperation was obvious. Cheryl cried. Michael tried the old lines about confused elders and concerned children. I played them a recording Sandra had made Michael's own voice speaking about making sure the money went to people who can actually use it. The color drained from his face. He sputtered. Cheryl called for forgiveness. I listened, felt the old guilt stir, then let it pass. The loans would be repaid on a schedule. Access to my grandchildren would be earned by respect, not demanded by coercion. I walked them to the door and told them, lightly, to tune in to local news next week. They left stunned. I felt oddly calm. The calm didn't last long in a good way. My interview about elder financial abuse hit local news, and the response was immediate. Calls began arriving from people who'd recognized themselves in my story. Offers to speak, invitations to radio shows, and messages from strangers who'd stopped potential scams because of the warning signs I'd described. The foundation's phone line lit up with pleas and thanks. I was becoming less of a victim and more of an advocate, and that gave me steady purpose. That momentum led to something darker and stranger, a call from the state attorney general. Detective Rebecca Santos came to my living room with a file that made my head swim. Apparently Michael and Cheryl weren't just sloppy. They'd hired someone a man pictured with them in a restaurant to help orchestrate guardianship schemes for seniors with assets. This network worked with unscrupulous assisted living operations to fast-track control and extract money. The numbers were staggering and criminal. Dozens of families, millions taken. Detective Santos asked the question that made my heart hammer. Would I wear a wire? I thought of Emma and Jake, the seniors who might be targeted next door, the friends from church, the people who'd trusted their children. I thought of the recording Sandra had already made and the evidence piling up in folders on my table. If wearing a wire could stop this network, I would do it. So I did. The device was tiny, tucked under my blouse. When I sat across from Michael at a coffee shop the next day, he sounded practiced at first. Then, sloppy as desperation crept in. He showed me pictures of a house in Arizona and described a future where I'd be helped and relocated, always framed as concern. He read from a notebook full of incidents he'd logged. Normal day-to-day slips spun into signs of decline. His words, casual and unguarded, painted the whole conspiracy. The plan to sell my home, the projection of how long I'd live in memory care, the advice from the professional he'd hired who'd told them how to create evidence for a guardianship petition. By the time Detective Santos stood and revealed herself, Michael's face had gone white. He was arrested for conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked bewildered, convinced, until the end, that he'd been protecting me. I watched him go and felt an odd mixture of grief and relief. The recording under my blouse would be part of a case that might spare other seniors this fate. Months later, the legal fallout played out. Michael pleaded guilty to conspiracy. He received probation, restitution to a victim's fund, and his marriage collapsed. The criminal ringleader, David Kellerman, was sentenced to years in federal prison. The network scale, millions stolen from elderly trust, finally got the scrutiny it deserved. And me? I kept speaking, building the foundation, helping people who'd reached out because they'd seen my interview. The foundation expanded into multiple states. We pushed for better guardianship oversight, and I kept collecting stories and evidence to help others. My book, cheekily titled The Drama Queen's Guide to Family Financial Abuse, found an audience that turned my private wound into public good. But that's getting ahead. If you want, I'll keep going into the courtroom, the sentencing, and the ripple effects on my life and the people I helped. Michael's sentencing hearing was surreal. I sat in the packed courtroom, the same woman he once dismissed as the drama queen, now flanked by advocates, attorneys, and reporters, covering what the media had labeled the perfect son scandal. Michael had accepted a plea deal, 5 years of probation, mandatory restitution payments to the state's Victim Assistance Fund, and a permanent mark on his record. It spared him federal prison, but not public accountability. Cheryl had filed for divorce 3 weeks after his arrest. She'd moved with the kids to Oregon, back to her parents' house. She cut off all contact with Michael and, for the time being, with me. I understood she needed to shield Emma and Jake from the media storm, but knowing I couldn't see them hurt more than anything else. The criminal architect behind the guardianship scheme, David Kellerman, wasn't so lucky. His sentencing was swift and heavy, 8 years in federal prison. The judge called his operation one of the most calculated elder exploitation rings she'd seen in her career, hearing that somehow made everything feel even more real. My son had deliberately aligned himself with a criminal network designed to strip vulnerable seniors of their lives, homes, and autonomy. But what mattered most wasn't the punishment. It was what grew from all of this. The Dorothy Hartwell Foundation expanded faster than I'd thought possible. 12 states now had chapters or partner offices. We'd built hotlines, legal support networks, and educational programs for seniors and their families. More than 300 families had already avoided or escaped exploitation because of the tools we provided. People wrote to us daily letters, emails, messages asking for help or thanking us for guidance that changed the course of their lives. Some stories were heartbreaking, some triumphant. All of them proved the same thing. What happened to me wasn't rare. It was happening across the country, in quiet, hidden ways. And then came the book, The Drama Queen's Guide to Family Financial Abuse. A cheeky title, a pointed reclaiming of the insult that had once cut me so deeply. It caught on far more than I expected. Interviews, talk shows, conferences. Suddenly, I was, as someone joked, America's accidental advocate. But the letter that meant the most to me wasn't from a showrunner or a politician. It was written in messy, uneven handwriting, clearly from a child who'd worked hard on every word. Dear Grandma Dorothy, Mommy says we moved because Daddy made bad choices. I miss you, but I saw your picture in a magazine at the dentist office. The article said you help people who are scared. I hope you help lots of people. Love, Emma. P.S. Jake learned to ride a bike. I kept that letter on my desk beside an old photo of me and the kids from happier times. I didn't know when I'd get to see them again, but the letter told me one thing: they hadn't forgotten me. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered like birds. Microphones pointed. Cameras zoomed. Someone shouted, "How does it feel to see your son sentenced for trying to defraud you?" I paused. Not for drama, but because the truth deserved precision. "It feels like justice," I said. "Not revenge, not victory, justice. Because his actions have finally been called what they were: exploitation. And no parent should be forced to choose between their safety and their child's approval." Another reporter asked if I regretted going public. "I regret that it was necessary," I answered. "But I don't regret protecting myself. And I don't regret preventing this from happening to other families." That night, I sat in the same living room Michael had planned to sell out from under me and read emails from across the country: seniors, adult children trying to protect their parents, lawyers, nursing home workers, even caregivers who'd witnessed exploitation and wanted advice on how to intervene. Every story reminded me that my fight had become something far larger than personal betrayal. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a warning, a shield, an example. Later, my phone rang. A number I didn't know. "Is this Dorothy? The woman who wrote the book?" a shaky voice asked. "Yes," I said gently. "How can I help?" "I think my grandson is trying to get me declared incompetent," she whispered. I found papers. I don't know what to do." I reached for the thick notebook where I kept contacts for attorneys, investigators, and advocates. "You've already taken the bravest step," I told her. "You've recognized the danger. Now let's protect you." As I talked her through her options, I caught my reflection in the window. Not the frightened, people-pleasing woman I'd once been, desperate for her son's approval, terrified of being alone. This woman was sharper, stronger, fiercer. The kind of woman who would rather lose a toxic family bond than lose herself. Michael had once sneered that I was a drama queen. He was right, but he'd misunderstood one thing. I wasn't dramatic because I was fragile. I was dramatic because I survived, because I fought, because I refused to be silenced, and because now my story was keeping others alive, independent, and free. This wasn't the end. Not for me. Not for the seniors calling my foundation. Not for the laws we were working to change. Not for the thousands who'd read my story and finally recognized the danger in their own lives. The drama queen had found her stage, and the performance had only just begun. I didn't know, back when I collapsed at my desk at Henderson Insurance, that my life was about to split into a before and an after. Before, the dutiful mother, the quiet widow, the woman who tolerated 1,000 small indignities because she was afraid of being alone. After, the woman who built an entire movement out of betrayal. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened in pieces like the phone call I got from Patricia Williams, the terrified grandmother who found forged guardianship drafts in her grandson's room. I guided her step by step, which lawyer to call, what to document, what signs to watch for. A week later, she called me again, this time crying with relief. She'd stopped the guardianship before it could be filed. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You saved yourself. I just handed you a flashlight." These calls became daily, then hourly. Some came from seniors, others from worried neighbors, church friends, or adult children watching siblings exploit their aging parents. The patterns were familiar now: emotional manipulation, concerned phone calls to doctors, sudden pressure to move into assisted living, rushed requests to add names to bank accounts. The same patterns Michael had used on me, the same patterns that almost worked. It turns out when a 62-year-old widow takes down a multi-state guardianship racket, people pay attention. Laws began shifting. Journalists dug into guardianship abuses nationwide. State representatives referenced my foundation during hearings. Attorneys general from multiple states reached out, asking how to help close the loopholes Kellerman's network had exploited. In one hearing, a lawmaker quoted my book directly: "Elder abuse doesn't begin in nursing homes. It begins at the dinner table." That line had come from a night I couldn't sleep the night after Sandra showed me those fabricated memory lapse notes Michael had kept. The betrayal of documenting my supposed decline while happily taking my money had burned something permanent into my memory. I meant every word. 6 months into my advocacy work, a letter arrived with no return address. I almost didn't open it. Inside was a single sheet. "Mom, I know you won't write back. I don't expect you to. I've been going to counseling. They say I have to take responsibility, not make excuses. So here it is. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I did it anyway. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope someday the kids will understand why things happened the way they did. Michael." My hands shook as I folded the letter. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I'd already cried all those tears the night I realized my own son had planned to bury me alive in bureaucracy and care plans. This letter wasn't an apology. It was an admission, and that mattered. Months later, a small envelope arrived with childish handwriting on the front. Emma's, Grandma Dorothy. "Mommy says we can see you again when we visit for Christmas." I'm excited. Jake is too. "Do you still have the cookie cutters shaped like stars? Love, Emma." I held the note to my chest. Cheryl had kept her distance from me during the legal chaos. But now, finally, she reached out herself cautiously, respectfully asking if we might meet for coffee before Christmas. She brought the kids. Michael was not invited. She made that clear. Cheryl was calmer now. Humbled even. She apologized, quietly and privately, for her part in the Instagram post, the manipulation, the blindness. Not everything was forgiven, but something was repaired, cautiously stitched back together in a way that didn't require me to be small anymore. The twins ran to me without hesitation. Emma held my hand the entire time, finding purpose, beyond pain. By spring, the foundation had partnered with 6 universities to study guardianship abuse. A documentary company reached out wanting to film a series called Protected: The Fight for Elder Freedom. They wanted me as a consultant, and possibly a featured speaker. I never wanted fame, only safety, then justice, then prevention. But if a spotlight helped save lives, I'd stand there without flinching. At the first national conference I spoke at, an auditorium of more than 900 people rose in a standing ovation. Seniors, social workers, attorneys, lawmakers, college students who suddenly saw their grandparents differently. I felt something settle inside me, not pride exactly, but alignment, like I'd finally stepped into the life I was always meant to have, a life I wouldn't have chosen, but one I could own. One evening, sitting in my living room, the same room Michael once planned to sell, I sipped tea and watched the sun slip behind my garden. My phone buzzed with a new email. Subject: "Your story saved my mother's life." I opened it. A woman wrote that her brother had been pushing their mother toward guardianship. She'd watched my interview, read my book, and realized what was happening. She confronted him, contacted a lawyer, and prevented a fraudulent guardianship filing. My story had saved her mother from losing her home. She ended her message with, "Thank you for being brave enough to be a drama queen." I laughed, a real, deep, joyful laugh, because I finally understood. Drama queens aren't fragile. Drama queens are loud when silence is deadly. Drama queens kick down doors when others whisper warnings. Drama queens survive things that would break quieter people. And drama queens change the world one reclaimed voice at a time. My closing words: if you're listening, if you're reading, if any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, trust that feeling. Ask questions. Document everything. Protect yourself early. And don't let anyone, not even family, shame you for wanting control of your own life. Thank you for letting me tell my story. And if you're ready, share yours in the comments.